Hello there. Welcome to a landmark episode of Shattered Lives, the Star's podcast series focusing on the murder trial of Gerry the Monk Hutch. The trial concluded earlier today after 13 fascinating weeks. Mr. Hutch, who denies the 2016 murder of Kinahan associate David Byrne at the Regency Airport Hotel, will now learn his fate on the 17th of April. That's when the three judges of the non-jury Special Criminal Court will return their judgment in the case against him. They will also return their verdicts against co-accused Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy, who deny facilitating the murder by providing cars for the gang involved. Neither is charged with murder. I'm crime correspondent Michael O'Toole, and joining me now is Chief Reporter Paul Healy. Hello, Mr. Healy.
Hello. We've come to the end at last.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I mean, I've really enjoyed covering this trial, so in a way it's an unusual, a strange sense that I feel a bit sad that it's over, but look, professionally speaking, I'm doing a job. Yeah, in another sense, I'm kind of relieved. It's been a long 13-week trial. So, you know, we've had our ups and downs and twists and turns in this case, but we've come to the end now after 13 long weeks.
So today we're going to talk about today's obviously the last day in the case. So we're going to talk about how it ended today. We might do some reflections or some bit of colour at the end, and I think we're going to have another pod with questions and answers. So there's still time if anybody wants to ask. We've got some really excellent questions. But if anybody wants to ask us any other questions, feel free. You can drop me or Healy or Ciaran Bradley DMs, or you can do it if you want to do it publicly on Twitter. There's no problem. The more the merrier. But I might just say one wee very, very quick thing. Some people, I don't know about you, Paul or Ciaran, but some people are asking me how I think it's going to go. And they're asking me to make predictions. I just want to say, for me, I'm not going to go down that road, and I'm going to tell you why. Firstly, it's obviously up to the judges. But secondly, I have no problem making predictions about football, about who's going to win the Premier League, obviously Man City. But I'm not going to make predictions about a man's life. And this is a man's life. It's actually three men's lives. So I won't be, I just don't think it's people can talk privately and whatever, but I certainly won't be making any predictions because it's the three lives of those men. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, and everybody can have their own thoughts on how it's going to go. I have my own thoughts about how it's going to go, but I'm not going to go down that road. Anyway, Paul, so how did it kick off today?
Yeah, sorry, just to your point, I feel the same way, and I think I've said this before, that people might be surprised to hear us say this, but our opinions don't really matter on what we think the verdict might be. We can give you our analysis and report on what we heard in court, but really our opinion on what the verdict is, it doesn't really matter. And ultimately, as journalists, we're not really supposed to take a position in any sense. So people might get frustrated why we're not answering that question, but that's the reason why.
Yeah, and also just on another point, I long ago gave up trying to read how court cases were going to go, because I've tried on several occasions and, I've got it spectacularly wrong. So there are lots of reasons why I don't really feel comfortable about doing predictions. So anyway, I think Paul and I are in agreement on that one.
Yeah, no, to answer your question, how things went today, I mean, look, the headline really is that the trial has come to an end. At the very end of proceedings today, Miss Justice Tara Burns went off with the two other judges and came back and gave us a date in which a verdict will be delivered in this trial at the latest. So that date is the 17th of April of this year. So by the Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, that's interesting. She said, so it's because I was wondering, is this something of a movable feast? So that's the latest date that the court at this stage say that they will have a verdict.
Yes, Miss Justice Tara Burns did say that in the event where they come up with a verdict prior to that date, they will notify the court. However, she said that was, she didn't expect that to be the case. So the date that they have set is the 17th of April, and I would imagine that is the date in which we'll get the verdict. By some chance that they manage to trawl through all of the evidence in this case prior to then and come to a verdict, there will be another date set. But by the very latest, we will know by the 17th of April what the verdict is in this case in relation to all three men.
And that's just under 3 months. I know we spoke about this before, and I was thinking it was going to be the middle of March, and it was based in the Freddie Thompson verdict on that, which was 2 months. And I suppose in hindsight, the Freddie Thompson case was really one man. There are effectively three cases rolled into one. So it stands to reason that it will take a bit longer.
Yeah, it's also interesting that it's almost the exact length that this case took that the judges now have to consider the case, about 13 weeks. It's this trial in total was 52 days. 52 days, 13 weeks. A huge length of time. We've gone through hours of CCTV evidence, 10 hours of tapes. We've gone through multiple witnesses. We've gone through maps, and then we went through Jonathan Dowdall and the cross-examination of Jonathan Dowdall. It's a huge, huge case. So they have a lot to consider, as we've said. In terms of yesterday, first of all, we discussed in great detail where the final speeches in relation to the prosecution in the case and the final speeches in relation to Brendan Grehan, senior counsel, defending Mr. Hutch. So today we had Paul Murphy's defence and we had Jason Bonney's defence. So Bernard Condon and John Fitzgerald gave their closing speeches in this case, and that's what took up the majority of today. What surprised me is that we went right through lunch. We didn't take any break. It seemed everyone involved was quite eager to come to a close on this case. So when we heard from John Fitzgerald, we went straight into Bernard Condon's evidence following that, and he followed right through 1 p.m. right through post 2 p.m. With his speech, and then we finished up shortly after that.
Just let me ask you, Paul, we know yesterday you were saying that Miss Murphy for the prosecution, her closing speech was about an hour. Brendan Grehan for Gerry Hutch was about 2 hours. What was the time frame for these two today? Were they longer? Or?
I think Mr. Fitzgerald was around about an hour, and this is from my recollection. And then Bernard Condon was about an hour 20 minutes or so just over an hour for Bernard Condon. I'm not going to go into great detail because we have examined a lot of this at length on this podcast, but I will just try to summarize both of their speeches. And when it comes to John Fitzgerald for Jason Bonney, his argument is really quite simple. He says on the face of it, the evidence in the case, if anything, supports his client's account, not the state's. And Jason Bonney is accused of using his BMW X5 to help the Regency hit team escape. And specifically, it was said by the prosecution that Flat Cap, that is Kevin Murray, was the person who got into the BMW X5 and is seen doing so on the CCTV footage at St. Vincent's GA. So Jason Bonney is specifically accused of helping Kevin Murray escape from the Regency Hotel. And Mr. Fitzgerald's evidence is basically that Jason Bonney is not picked up on CCTV anywhere other than on his home, at his home in Drimnagh Wood that morning. And then subsequent to that, the footage pertaining to the movements of the vehicle, there is no proof whatsoever from the state that Jason Bonney is the person behind the wheel. He's not seen at St. Vincent's GAA, at Buckingham Village, in any of the other spots. And he says that the CCTV evidence and the phone evidence supports his account that he went to Newbrook Avenue, which is where the home that Jason Bonney says was being renovated is located in Donaghmede. And that is where he remained for the rest of the day. And we've heard from Miss McGlynn, who was the alibi witness for Jason Bonney. She said, which I don't propose to go into great detail again, but she said that she had seen Willie Bonney, Jason Bonney's father, getting into the BMW X5 after Jason had come that morning in the Jeep. There was a swap over. And then she saw Jason Bonney go across to this house that was being worked on Newbrook Avenue. And then subsequently she saw him again and asked him to move a truck around 2:45 p.m. So that's in and around the time period where Mr. Bonney is supposed to be in the Vincent's GAA area, according to the prosecution. And yet this witness said could place him at Newbrook Avenue. And in his summary, in his closing speech today, Mr. Fitzgerald is basically saying that the CCTV evidence and the phone evidence corroborates that account, in that there is a time period in which the vehicle is seen going in the direction of Newbrook Avenue and takes a route towards Newbrook Avenue. And if this was a person who was involved in a sophisticated, organised operation, why did he divert from the direct route that he could have taken from his home in Portmarnock all the way into the city centre that day? And he surmises that the evidence clearly shows that this backs up his account, that there was a swap in driver, and that Willie Bonney, Jason Bonney's father, was the person driving the BMW X5. And when it comes to this witness, Paul Byrne, the brother-in-law of Jason Bonney, he says that in terms of who do you believe, right? So Miss McGlynn, she says she can remember clearly the 5th of February because it was her child's 13th birthday, and she was arranging a party in the house at that point in time when Jason Bonney and his father called. She can also remember 3 weeks later that Jason Bonney's mother called to her mother's address, upset and asking what happened that day, and asking for her account of what happened that day, because there had been a massive row between father and son. And then in terms of Paul Byrne's account, he claimed that he could remember spending the entire day with Willie Bonney, and that Willie Bonney never left his home, and that he spent time having lunch with him, and that the BMW X5, he never saw him drive that vehicle, or that a vehicle ever be associated with Jason Bonney's father, Willie. And his recollection in relation to that was, he put it down to, if you can remember where you were on 9/11, he could remember where he was that day on the 5th of February. And essentially, Mr. Fitzgerald was arguing that Miss McGlynn's argument was more believable. She had more of a reason to remember the events that day in terms of her child's birthday, and in terms of only 3 weeks later, she was then asked to recount the events again. So this was something that would have stuck in her mind more clearly. And in terms of why she didn't come forward sooner, well, he said, well, what person would want to put themselves on the stand in this case, put themselves forward and put themselves under scrutiny and ultimately have their face in the newspaper? And he says her account effectively stands the test of time and is more believable than Mr. Byrne's.
There is some credibility. There is credibility to that because, look, you know, and now we're now talking in 2003, but this was March 2016, and you and I covered it, the height of the feud, and things were not only tense but extremely frightening for an awful lot of people. We know it wasn't Mr. Bonney who got a GAM form. You know, this was really, really heavy time.
Yes, February 2016, yeah. But you're right. Nonetheless, February, March, it was an extremely heavy time. And that's another thing that was raised, you know, in terms of Jason Bonney's original interview with Gardaí as to why he lied to them and effectively didn't tell them the true story, as he puts it, that his father was the one driving the BMW, because he told the guards that he was the one driving the BMW in an interview. And basically Mr. Fitzgerald's argument was that at this point in time, Jason Bonney was in fear for his own life and for his family's safety. And irregardless of any dispute or feud between him and his father, he wasn't going to put his own father in danger. And in not only in danger in terms of his life, but also in terms of his freedom, and to ultimately maybe have him connected to this Regency Hotel incident. And that is why maybe he covered for his father at that point in time, is his argument. His father is now dead and, as we've said, can't defend himself. So his argument now is that his dad was driving the BMW, but at the time when he spoke to Gardaí, he wasn't willing to say that. And so Mr. Fitzgerald is saying that Mr. Bonney's argument is far more believable than the allegation by the state that he was the one behind the wheel. As he says, there's only the CCTV footage of Jason Bonney at his home in Drumney Wood, and nothing else supports the account that he was the one with the BMW by the time it got to Vincent's GA and picked up Kevin Murray.
And do you remember, sorry Paul, do you remember, I remember is either you or I wrote the story, that, firstly, it's the Kinahan cartel who are what you might say on the other side of the Hutch crime gang, shall we say, right? But I remember quite clearly being told that the Kinahans were going after anybody that they believed was connected to this. Ancillary, 20 people, 30 people who they had in their sights. So, it was, I can't stress this enough, it was a very, very dangerous time for anybody whose name cropped up in this.
Yeah, and I suppose that is reflected in terms of Jason Bonney, his allegation through Mr. Fitzgerald that he was concerned for his safety and his family's safety. His son had gone off to Australia, and he'd indicated that he was going to have to move off as well. And he didn't trust the guards. He felt that as a result of his vehicle being taken, that he had gotten this gym form. Look, you can form an opinion on that, but that is Mr. Bonney's opinion, that as a result of the vehicle being seized from him and his reputation in the community being damaged, that he got this threat to his life. And so at this point in time, Mr. Fitzgerald argues that his client was not willing to tell the guards the full truth, which is that his father was the one driving the BMW, not him. Then when it comes to Paul Murphy, essentially Bernard Condon's argument is, in a nutshell, that none of the CCTV footage shown in the case proves that his client was the one in the taxi, the silver Avensis taxi, at St. Vincent's GAA Club, at the Donnycarney Church, in any of the crucial locations, Buckingham Village as well. So Buckingham Village is the alleged meet-up spot of the convoy of 6 vehicles involved, including the van. And they are seen leaving Buckingham Village and going in the direction towards Donnycarney Church, and ultimately at the Vincent's GAA at 2:41 p.m. when the gang run through the alleyway and get into the vehicles. And he says that at no point in any of the footage is Paul Murphy seen, identified, let alone his taxi. And he says that the footage is not good quality. It's not in HD. It's in black and white. The weather, oftentimes it was raining, which made the footage worse. The prosecution regularly argued that Mr. Murphy's vehicle is identifiable by the wheels, by the tyres, by stickers in the window. But Mr. Condon argued that you can't really make any inferences, and it could be any silver taxi, and that plenty of cars have stickers, and that the reg plate is not clear, and even the colour of the vehicle is not clear. In relation to Paul Murphy, he admits, and allegedly admitted before footage was even shown to him, that he was at the Maxall garage nearby that day, that he went in and got a sandwich for himself in the newspaper, and then subsequently at the Beachcomber. So Mr. Murphy admits that he was at the Maxall garage and the Beachcomber, and he is seen on CCTV footage in those places and identified himself on the CCTV footage in those places. But 19 minutes later, when he gets up to Donnycarney, when this vehicle allegedly gets up to Donnycarney Church and up to the Vincent's GAA, Mr. Condon is essentially arguing that the vehicle and Mr. Murphy are not identifiable. It could be any taxi, it could be any vehicle. And also he said the allegation that these vehicles travelled in a convoy of 6 was never really proven. He said it might sound nice, and it might give someone a dopamine hit that they have cracked the case, so to speak, and said that these 6 vehicles travelling in line are travelling in an organised convoy, but he says that case has never been proven. In relation to the key card, I thought this was interesting. So there's a key card that was found in Mr. Murphy's vehicle, which opens the gates at the Buckingham Village where these vehicles all met up. And it is only a digit away from another key card that was found in the home of Patsy Hutch. And Mr. Condon didn't spend a whole lot of time on this, other than to say that there might have been a relationship between Paul Murphy and Patsy Hutch. And I think the suggestion was that Paul Murphy might have driven Patsy Hutch from time to time. might have done jobs with Patsy Hutch. And he suggested that any number of possibilities are possible, including that Patsy Hutch himself might have been the one who dropped or left that key card in the vehicle. He says it just doesn't definitively prove that Paul Murphy was the owner of this key card. So that is effectively his case. The case against Paul Murphy is the CCTV footage, and he says that the CCTV footage just doesn't identify for absolute certainty Paul Murphy's taxi in the places that it's supposed to be to prove the case against him, which is the Vincent's GAA Club, the Donnycarney Church, Buckingham Village, and so he rests his case on that, in that there are plenty of suggestions here, but none of it adds up to beyond a reasonable doubt that his client is guilty.
And that was that.
That was that, yeah. I mean...
was it anticlimactic at the end?
I wouldn't say it was anticlimactic. I mean, you think these things are going to go in a certain order. I mean, I think we might have maybe expected that Brendan Grehan would have been the final speaker. The order in which it went is the order in which it went. You have to remember 3 people are on trial here. Obviously, in terms of, let's say public interest, people are interested primarily in the trial of Gerry Hutch. The trial of Gerry Hutch effectively ended yesterday. That's the truth. These 2 other men, they are charged alongside Mr. Hutch, and I think their case is quite fascinating. It's worth talking about. I've spent a bit of time talking about it here. But in that sense, maybe I'm anticlimactic in terms of Gerry Hutch. The trial against Gerry Hutch is over. But it was interesting to then discover towards the end of the day that all-important date when the verdict will be read out. And I think what's interesting about that, it only came to light when we put it into context, that we realised that Gerry Hutch is yet to celebrate his 60th birthday. And in looking up when his birthday is, it's on the 12th of April. So 5 days before he's going to learn his fate as to whether he'll spend the rest of his life effectively in prison or whether he will be found not guilty. 5 days after his 60th birthday.
And also it's remarkable that it's 7 and a bit years since the Regency. And the time has flown, but it feels like yesterday. So many things have happened, and it has taken up so much of our professional lives. I mean, I know Mr. Condon was talking about the bad weather on the day of the Regency. I remember that because I was stuck outside the Regency for several hours and I was absolutely bucketing. But even I remember I was driving into work and I got a call from Des Gibson, our then editor, saying to me, now I was starting on the late, so it was at 2:30, so I was late because of the weather and the rain. And he was saying to me, did you hear anything about a mass shooting in the Regency? And I went, no. And then that was that. I was going to say that was that for the rest of the day, but that was that for 4 years. So I remember, it's funny, Miss McGlynn talking about, you remember, or was it Mr. Byrne saying, you remember where you were when the Twin Towers happened and all? I completely remember where I was when I heard about the Regency for the first time. Yeah,
I mean, I was relatively new to the Star. In my case, I started in the Star in September of 2015. It wasn't long after that Gerry Hutch was shot. I don't think, as a young cub reporter, that it really dawned on me until a couple of months into 2016, just the scale of this feud and, the unprecedented nature of it. And from my perspective, just in terms of, as a journalist, trying to learn the ropes, so to speak, I was thrown in the deep end because... we started attending murder scenes, gangland murder scenes. And one that really struck out to me, still kind of lives in my memory, is that year is the murder of Martin O'Rourke. He was an innocent homeless man, and I remember we learned of his murder on Sheriff Street, and it wasn't too far away from our office, and myself and a photographer got down there, and at the time that we actually got down there, the guards hadn't even arrived yet. The body was still lying on the street. And I'll never forget that, because that is just the stark nature of this whole feud. And it really hit home from that point on. The unprecedented nature of it and the shocking nature of this. 18 people were murdered in total. As you say, you remember the day of the Regency. I remember you being out of the office, and I can remember 3 days later when Eddie Hutch was murdered, and I remember you going into the editor and in the initial couple of seconds and minutes that it had happened, and there was speculation, tell me if I'm wrong, when a murder just happens of this nature, a high profile, right after the Regency, you don't really know all the facts straight away. And I think there was a fear that actually Gerry Hutch had been murdered, and was initially Gerry Hutch has been murdered, and then the realization dawned, no, it's a relative, no, it's his brother, it's Eddie Hutch. I hadn't really heard of Eddie Hutch prior to this, and then you were trying to find a photograph of Eddie Hutch. You learned he was a taxi man, and through your sources and your information, you were able to obtain a photograph of Eddie Hutch, the first photograph of Eddie Hutch. God, it's just, when you think back on it, like, it seems like yesterday, but it's mad.
Do you know what? They all stick out for me, and I will say that as soon as Gerry Hutch was murdered, I knew this is really heavy, right? I knew this is going to be really, really bad, and I always remember just before Eddie Hutch was murdered, I went on the Monday. I went on Sean O'Rourke on RTE. So this was on the Monday after the Regency on the Friday, and I went on Sean O'Rourke, and I said, Sean, this is going to be absolutely shocking. It's going to be a horrific gangland war, and it's brutal. And he was shot at just after, I think it was 8 o'clock, so maybe 12 hours, 10 hours later, he was shot dead. But you're right. I mean, I remember the Martin O'Rourke one. That was really shocking. One that stands out for me, they all stand out for me, but the one that I think about a lot is the murder of Gerry Hutch. So that was in May 2017. And the reason that it's sort of similar to what you were saying about getting there first. I was driving in, I think it was on somewhere around North Strand, and I heard the sirens. And I always remember it was a DFB, a Dublin Fire Brigade paramedic jeep, and it flew past me, and it turned right onto heading up towards Summerhill, that street there, beside between Sean McDermott Street and Summerhill. And I went, no, not I've forgotten the name, it'll come back to me. And I went, oh my God, something's happened. And then my phone started pinging that there'd been a murder. Then they thought it was Gerry Hutch. So it was at Avondale House, which is it's about 5 minutes walk from our office. So I got there I diverted and got there very quickly. And you know what stayed with me to this day? So this was about, 5 or 10 minutes after the murder. And there were maybe 200 people out in the street, right? And just a complete silence. Nobody was talking. Everybody was just, and you would think that in something like this to be roaring and screaming and, panic and everything. It was the silence, and that silence has stayed with me. It was eerie.
Yeah. Exact same in the case of Martin O'Rourke. As I said, the guards hadn't arrived, the body was still in the street, and there wasn't a single soul around. Yeah, that does stick with you in terms of, and it's in a way, this trial and today was the culmination of much of that. I mean, obviously, the doesn't mean the feud is over, but we've come to a certain end point. I mean, the last 7 years have just been relentless in terms of this. I mean, and the story is not over. The Kinahans are still at large, and there are plenty of investigations in relation to them, and it's just a story that keeps on going. But I think maybe what we're trying to say is that we didn't really realize as journalists what we were getting into when this all kicked off, and that we would be here 7 years later talking about the Monk trial.
And we'll probably be talking about this in at least 5 years, because this 2023 I consider probably more likely than last year is the year that international law enforcement or whatever gets Daniel Kinahan. I think he's probably under more pressure now. So, if you thought the Hutch trial would be big, can you imagine if, as I suspect what'll happen, they bring him over to the US and he's in an orange jumpsuit over there? So, that'll be one hell of a trial if it happens, which I think it will. So, it's been fascinating, really, really fascinating. And that's another point about this. This trial has been about, or this pod has been about the trial, but Paul and I and Ciaran are very keen to develop the pod and keep it going. So I think we're going to start doing a sort of general podcast, but that's something we'll be talking about in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously have a sit down and a talk and a think about it, but I think we want to say that we've been very appreciative of the audience that we have gathered and the people that have been listening, and we're going to have a think about talking about these subjects long into the future. But in terms of the trial, yeah, I mean, this is it. We're done talking about it effectively. We might do a Q&A, but and we'll obviously do one when the verdict comes. But just can't, from my perspective, and I'm sure you'll say the same, I can't express my gratitude enough, and thanks to the people that have been listening. So thank you.
Yes, and people have been very kind about the pod. And one thing that I take great pride in, apart from how well it's going, is that a lot of people have said to me, I don't know if they've said this to you, Paul or Ciaran, but they've said how sort of happy they've been that we have been straight down the line and impartial, and we're not taking sides, and we're trying to be fair to everybody, and we're just doing our job, saying what we see, and we're not coming at it from any, sort of perspective. It is what it is, and that's what we've really striven to do. I mean, I've been a court reporter for a very, very, very long time, and that's one of my tenets, that you just do what is said in court. Now, we've been lucky that this is a special criminal court, so we can contextualise things, and we can, explain things, and, go off scripted, but it's extremely important to me and Paul and Ciaran that we remain impartial and we show our impartiality, and that's what we have tried to do the whole time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to do a Q&A at another date. We'll have that up as soon as we can. So we still have questions. We still want to hear questions from anybody who wants to ask us anything, but just don't ask us to predict, because we're not going to be doing that. But thanks for listening. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to thank Paul for his unstinting work in the court. I know what it's like to cover court cases like this. I filled in for him for a few days, but he was fantastic. Before Paul goes, I just want to, I spent the day doing a bit of stat work, and I just want to tell people about this. People are asking about the special criminal court. I just think people might be interested in this. I went and looked at conviction statistics for the special criminal court between 2020 and 2016. 2020 is the last available year from the DPP's report. So the conviction rate in 2020 was 100%. There were 8 cases. The conviction rate in 2019, there were 10 cases, and that was 90%. The conviction rate in 2018 had 21 cases, and it was 100% conviction. The conviction rate in 2017 had 20 cases and 100% conviction. And the conviction rate in 2016, there were 29 cases, and the conviction rate was 90%. Well, we'll leave it there.
I think we better. Yeah. Wow, that's extraordinary. Extraordinary. But there you go.
Thanks for listening, everybody.